Hey guys, so I'm a little bit frustrated right now. I tried recording this video already and I realized I made a mistake and I had to head back and fix something real quick and it was just a big pain in the butt. Anyways, ignoring that, this is something I'm going to try to do more often, and that's take a part of a fictional universe, kind of explain the lore a little bit, and relate it back to my personal life. And in this case, I'm going to talk a little bit about military discipline. Now, if you guys aren't aware, for 5 years I was an active duty personnel with the United States Marine Corps. Now, I say this once in a while, but none of my opinions reflect on the DoD, the Department of the Navy, or the Marine Corps in general. These are all my personal opinions, but I can talk a little bit about this. So now I want to talk about a little bit of Warhammer 40k lore. Now, specifically, actually, Warhammer 30k lore, the prequel series, the Horus Heresy, and even more specifically, I want to talk about the warrior lodges and how that kind of reflects on military discipline. Now, it's a little bit funny of me talking about military discipline because the Marine Corps is kind of a strange branch of the military. And that's because one thing we heavily emphasize, or something that we really encourage in the Marines, is having a strong sense of initiative, so that if we are separated from our command structure, we are immediately ready to take command of whatever small unit that we are a part of, whether that be a Lance Corporal taking control of a fire team, or a captain taking command of a company if their leadership is somehow indisposed. Now, this leads to some interesting amounts of friction within the Marine Corps. And that's specifically what I'm talking about, is that we are well known for complaining. And that's because we all have our own ways of wanting to do things, of wanting to take care of certain obstacles in our way. And that's how we deal with certain problems. And sometimes it's because the leadership is so separated from the issues of the common man that we just, we bitch a little bit, right? We all have our own ways that we want to deal with it. And this is part of the Marines' desire to problem solve, to use our initiative to make a situation less dumb. Especially since the Marine Corps often wants to make things dumb, but in a way it is also to instill discipline. So it's hard to get into examples of it, but they'll have us do something that's seemingly dumb, but serves an actual purpose or teach a certain lesson. And when it comes to the warrior lodges, and I guess I have to take a slight deviation here to actually explain what the warrior lodges are. So, I'm going to try to make this relatively short explanation of 40k lore, but in Warhammer 40k, or in 30k technically, there is the Emperor of Mankind. He is basically immortal. He's called a perpetual, which just means that if he dies, he'll come back to life, and he never ages, okay? Eventually he decides that running things from behind the scenes, or letting mortal men control humanity didn't exactly work out. So he intervenes, and he wants to take direct control of humanity. But he doesn't want to make an empire for himself. He wants to make an empire of mankind. He wants people to run it. He doesn't want to run it in the long term, but he needs to set everything up and get it all going, which means he needs generals. So he, along with a team of scientists and people who specialize in psychic powers, which is a type of magic in this universe, decide to make him 21 sons with his wife Erda. And he was going to raise them on Terra to be his perfect generals, and then he would take them out into the galaxy to conquer, well, all the former planets of the Human Federation, which preceded his empire. And Erda, along with others, were tricked by a group of individuals, gods, because there are gods in this universe, the Chaos Gods. Now there are 4 Chaos Gods. You have Khorne, the god of bloodshed, murder, and combat prowess. You have the god of excess, Slanesh, and it's not just like sexual excess, it's also like drugs, rock and roll, seriously. And basically any emotion that you can possibly experience, Slanesh wants you to experience it to its greatest extent, like a drug addict, always wanting the next hit or high, whether that be adrenaline or some hardcore drug, or what have you. Then you have the god of nature, but he's also the god of rot, disease, plague, and that is Nurgle. Then you have the god of change, which is Tzeentch, the god of schemes, of backstabbing, of always causing strife amongst people. And a lot of the people who were working with the Emperor, it is hinted that they were tricked by these gods, or they came to believe that the Emperor was a tyrant, which wasn't true. He wasn't. And in fact, Erda was so deluded that she sabotaged the Emperor's laboratory and sent the 21 sons scattered throughout the galaxy. And centuries later, it would take one of her sons telling her to her face that she basically ruined all of their lives, for her to self-reflect even just a tiny little bit, to realize that she had messed up majorly. Like, she never even second-guessed herself after centuries of being able to mew on it, to like really maul on it. That's how dumb this character is. A lot of people really don't like her because of that, because literally they introduced a woman just to make her as dumb as humanly possible. Which, for both sides of the aisle, whether you're conservative or liberal, yeah, it's pretty stupid of a motivation. And then she has to be talked to by Lorgar, of all people, one of the most corrupt sons in the universe. Basically, like I said in a previous video, Lorgar does horrible things, and he needs to place something above himself in order to justify his actions. Now, that originally was the Emperor, which he viewed as a god. And when the Emperor refused to be seen as a god, well, he sought out the Chaos Gods to be his new excuse for all of his horrible actions. And, this corrupted motherfucker, even he looked at his mother figure and basically told her that she's worse than anyone else in the universe. And they got rid of her real quick after all the backlash against just how awful of a character she was. Anyways, satisfying ending to her character arc. Being thrown under every single possible bus possible. Anyways, Lorgar, after he decides to join the Chaos Gods, sends out his chaplains, because, you know, he's highly religious, so he has chaplains, not like the Catholic or chaplains of the modern day Navy, which are used also in the Marine Corps, but corrupted beings that, you know, worship dark gods and sacrifice people to these gods, to go throughout the legions to seed the warrior lodges. And these warrior lodges would eventually corrupt the legions to turn them to chaos. So, what was the idea behind the warrior lodges, and how does it relate to military discipline? Well, you see, the warrior lodges was an organization with a relatively interesting and perhaps beneficial aim behind them. You see, in the military, both in 30K and in real life, we engage in a little bit of camaraderie, where, again, Marines will complain and bitch about certain things now and again, and they will like to get things off of their chest, to talk with commanders or higher enlisted personnel, and ask them if we can change things up just a little bit, to make things run a little bit smoother, to increase the value of our training. And one of my fellow Marines, the sergeant, recently did something along those lines where he questioned the integrity of a military drill, military training exercise, where he wanted to make sure that we were getting the most out of the training. You know, things like that. So the idea behind the warrior lodges is that while you're at the lodge, it's like an enlisted club or an officer club, where no matter who you are, whether you're enlisted, whether you're a sergeant or a lowly battle brother, which is like the equivalent of a private, or whether you're an officer like a first lieutenant. Well, they didn't really have lieutenants, they had like captains and such. Eventually they would make more ranks in the Astartes, but basically you would go to this lodge and everyone would be equal there. And anyone can raise any concern that they want in the lodge and be able to complain, and there won't be any backlash, there won't be any chewing out, they won't follow them into their work day, quote unquote. All of it will be left there at the lodge. Basically what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, kind of thing. And it's a warrior brotherhood. Now this seems like a relatively good idea. An enlisted man, like one of the lowliest battle brothers, can go up to his captain and speak his mind plainly without fear of reprisal. And then that captain can explain to him, like, no, we do it because of this reason, I understand your concerns, or he will take it into consideration and implement some changes in the way he leads. However, you see, in an enlisted club, or in an officer club, they usually keep the enlisted guys and the officers separated. Officers in the Marine Corps can call each other by their first names, but this is not something that's common amongst the enlisted guys. However, if you're in the Army, and you're a private, and you go out of town to a bar, and there's like a sergeant first class out there, they'll refer to each other by their first names, and they will talk as if they are not part of a single unit, or as if one is not in charge of the other, and they can speak their mind plainly. You would think, okay, it's not that much different. And again, it wouldn't follow them until their day-to-day. However, there are always limits to what you can say and do. For instance, when Trump lost the election in 2020, there was some talk about what would happen within the enlisted personnel and probably within the officer corps, in the Marine Corps, and probably the other branches as well. And it was more like hypothetical stuff. No actual plans, no actual conspiracies or anything. Just, joking around, making fun of it, kind of. What if, this situation happened? What would we do? If we had to pick a side. And none of us wanted to pick a side because, how absolutely chaotic the whole thing would be. The entire country would break apart if anything like that actually happened. Now, again, we made certain jokes about it, but, we all swore an oath to the Constitution, and we're not the ones who interpret the Constitution. Now, we can disobey an unlawful order, but there's only so much wiggle room there. So, we made some jokes here or there on what we would do, but in the end, we accepted that Trump lost and moved on, whether or not we agreed that he lost or not. As military personnel, we still had to obey lawful orders and follow along with what the courts and what Congress had decided were the results. And we just moved on with our lives. Now again, a lot of us were Trump supporters, so we let's say we voted majority for Trump. Again, not speaking for the entire DOD, but there was a lot of talk amongst us on who we preferred as a leader. And again, whoever becomes president is our leader for however many years that they're in office. But we preferred Trump, and a lot of us voted for Trump. And we were happy that he won. Again, whatever. But again, there's certain limits to what you can say and do. And one of the things you can't do in the military is make comments about people's race, sexuality, or decisions in life. To a certain extent. You can always joke around with it, but you cannot discriminate. Even if you're joking here or there, there would be a little bit of pushback or recrimination, even if you were in a safe space. Like the Marine Corps ball, for example, or out in town at the bar. You can't just start threatening to hurt people or hurt yourself. There was certain stuff we had to report and make sure that if someone said that they were wanting to engage in self-harm, for example, we needed to take them out and bring them to a psychological facility or what have you. Now, in the warrior lodges in 30K, it should be mentioned that the Astartes, superhuman warriors whose genetic template is based on the Primarchs, the sons of the Emperor, they are taken from mortal men and genetically engineered with DNA from the Primarchs using something called the gene seed, which makes them nigh immortal, or at least very long-lived creatures, with many extra organs, and they're several times the size of a normal man. Superhumans. And these people started to form a unique or divergent fraternity with humanity. Now, when a person becomes a Astartes, they are stunted in many ways. You see, you have to take a child around the ages of 10 to 14, and then they start to be converted to a space marine. And one of the things that's removed from them is lust, desire, and perhaps even the ability to breed in normal ways. Now, it's never exactly confirmed like that, but it is assumed that the Astartes, the Space Marines, are sterile, which means the only way they can reproduce is by the gene seed, which, once they turn into a Space Marine, 2 separate gene seeds are created within their bodies, which can be taken out of them and used to make more Space Marines. So one gene seed can be used to make 1 Space Marine, and that Space Marine produces 2 gene seed, which basically allows them to always increase their numbers unless the body is completely destroyed and those gene seeds are somehow ruined. Unlikely to happen, but it's possible. Anyways, this inability to have families or experience life as normal created a mental side effect where these people stop seeing themselves as human. After all, they're superhuman, but they don't experience life like a normal man will. In fact, their emotions are completely and utterly wrecked. They don't feel fear as much. They don't feel lust. They don't feel love. They have a very platonic type of love. They can't feel romantically involved with anybody. Not even with each other. Like, if somebody was, born or would be gay as they grew up, as a Space Marine, even that is completely destroyed. Like, they just don't act human anymore. So they start to see humans as inferior. And one thing the Lodges pushed was this superhuman supremacy. After all, the only reason they would need humans was to create more children that could be used to create more Space Marines. As they produced more gene seed in their bodies, they could just use humanity as slaves, as a breeding population, take their hardiest boys, and then use the gene seeds created in their body to make more Space Marines, and then they would rule over the normal humans as like demigods. And after all, they're superior to humans in every extent. Besides that whole crippled emotions thing, which they see emotions often as a weakness. Instead of, being absolutely necessary to having, like, a human existence. Because a lot of Space Marines just don't see value in, their previous families. They want, or they only care about their battle brothers. They don't care about their fathers, or their brothers, or their sisters, or their nieces and nephews. Hell, some of them, like the Space Wolves, for example, could even be converted to the Space Marines at later ages, like 16 or 17. That's unlikely, but they're more likely to survive the process at an older age, which means that some of them actually had children of their own. But once they were converted to Space Marines, they just didn't care. They were like lustful kids who had children before the emotions were basically stripped from them. And they don't care about their progeny. Now it's just their younger years, where they were naive and they didn't care about their warrior culture. They just had some weakness or desires that they wanted to get out of their system before they properly became true warriors. space wolves have a relatively good view on the civilian population, but again, they don't care about their fathers or their mothers back home. They will never go visit them in their dying moments when they're on their deathbed, because all they care about is their warrior brothers. Now, the only ones who do care about their families back home is basically the salamanders. But again, neither here nor there. In these warrior lodges, they were pushing superhuman supremacy, which, you know, if the officers and chaplains and other, like, spiritual personnel of the Legion weren't pushing this superhuman supremacy, you know, a lot of people in the Legion would, you know, kind of look down on this arrogance and belief that they were completely and utterly superior, which eventually became them believing themselves to be demigod humans that really should have ruled over all the pitiful, pathetic, mortal beings. Now, just imagine for a second, for a brief second, if this kind of ideology was prevalent inside the United States Marine Corps, or the United States Army, or the Air Force, where they believe that we should be a martial society run by the military, or anyone too weak to be a military personnel was lower than scum, and the true leaders are those who were strong enough, disciplined enough, and powerful enough to get through military training, and only those with an iron discipline should rule the rest of humanity, and even our children and her wives were nothing other than just absolutely pathetic, weak humans that are too weak to survive in the conditions that harden us into true warrior kings, that truly are the only ones who should ever be in charge of anything. Imagine that for just a brief second, and how, if this ideology was legitimately spread amongst the United States military, and just how much distrust and hatred the civilian population would have against the military, and do everything in its power to prevent us from ever having an ounce of the power we ever desired. How justified it would be for the civilian population to make sure that we never got to implement these horrific policies and push for every desire against the civilian population. Yet, there were people inside the legions in Warhammer 30k, 40k, who, you know, there would be a little bit of pushback against this, and honestly, I do not blame them at all. And it is wild to me, just, you know, how ignored this part of the lore is. Because it sounds good on paper, but these warrior lodges are completely secret. They have a disturbing sense of secrecy behind them. Now, I'm not talking about like the secrecy that like the Mason lodges do. Now, as a Catholic, the real life Mason lodges have a heavy beef with the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is not very happy with the lodges. But then you also had inside the Catholic Church the Knights Templar, and the Knights Hospitaller, which, by the way, the Knights Hospitaller, the knighthood of St. John, still exists, as does the Teutonic Knights. That still exists too. And then you have the Knights of Columbus. That still exists. And they have their secret lore here and there. But they don't preach about their superiority over, like, the masses. Like, these knightly orders that still exist are, nowadays, they're humanitarian organizations that bring, like, food and water and medical attention to areas suffering from natural disasters. They're there to help people. It'd be a little club that people can go to that form camaraderie with. There's no superiority behind them. The warrior lodges, on the other hand, just in 30K, are spreading like these horrible ideologies that, you know, just absolutely terrible. And again, it's never mentioned in the 40K community. You know, like, the warrior lodges are interesting and all, and people can see, like, how they corrupted people. But, you know, just how bad an idea they are if you want to keep discipline amongst the unit. And in fact, as the unit embraces these warrior lodges and the conspiracies behind them, discipline doesn't just fall apart because of the corruption, the chaos corruption rampant through these organizations, being corrupted to these gods that ask them to do horrible things for sacrifices, in exchange for power. The warrior lodges ate away at that discipline because chaos wants legitimate chaos within the ranks, chaos amongst the civilian population, chaos among the military. They want people backstabbing each other. They want intrigue. They want people spilling blood. So they completely don't like military discipline. They want maybe a little bit of military discipline here and there, but they believe that in an organization like the military, if there is a person who is, you know, not strong enough, not powerful enough, not smart enough to do what needs to be done, not sneaky enough to do what needs to be done, then, you know, maybe his subordinate should stab him, take over, and lead the unit properly. Something that, it's not acceptable in the United States military whatsoever. We do preach initiative inside the United States Marine Corps, but killing your superior officer and taking his place is not one of those things that the military appreciates. In fact, that's something that you you will be executed for, more than likely, or at least thrown in jail for the rest of your life. With good reason, mind you. But, again, I don't want to go on about this all day. This video is going on longer than normal. I mean, I used to go with 50 minutes for videos, but, you know, 20 minutes, pretty good, 35 minutes. I just want to point out how these warrior lodges were specifically designed to destroy military discipline within the not the United States military, within the legions within 30K, before they got corrupted. The discipline wasn't destroyed by chaos corruption. It was destroyed by the lodges. And then the chaos corruption, well, it compounded this destruction of discipline. It made sure that they properly fell to chaos. One had to precede the other. And in some of the legions, the warrior lodges failed. For example, in the Iron Warriors, which turned to chaos, the warrior lodges never caught on because they had basically their strategy clubs. Basically, a mix between a D&D club and like a Warhammer 40k club, where they would run simulations for the military operations that they had in the past, or future operations. Basically, they would war game out future operations and try to come up with better strategies. The Warrior Lodge never took place within the Iron Warriors because they had something that they already preferred. Their little game club, basically. But it is better than a game club. It was actually to make their commanding officers better at their job. But they, despite not having the Warrior Lodges, they still fell to chaos. Whereas the White Scars had the Warrior Lodges, but they failed to cause the Legion fall to chaos because their Primarch, Jagatai Khan, made sure that yes, they could meet in secret, but everyone knew about them. That they couldn't really subvert anybody. Like, they could make their own little schemes and such, but that they all had their freedom to do whatever they wanted anyways. So, freedom from the Imperium, when the White Scars, that's the name of the Legion, already had freedom to do whatever they wanted, there was nothing that the Chaos Gods could offer them that they didn't already have. A lot of the legions betrayed the Emperor because they didn't think that they were free to act in the way they wanted to. In fact, one of the lies that the lodges pushed was that they were being replaced by mortals, by the administration, the administratum, that the bureaucrats would take over, that maybe even the legions would be purged, or just quietly phased out, and as they all died off in war, their positions as warriors would be replaced. Complete and utter bullshit, mind you, that wasn't never going to happen. But this is the lie they pushed. That eventually the legionnaires, the Astartes, would lose their privileges and lose their freedom. However, Jagatai Khan, being the son of the Emperor, promised his legionnaires, his Astartes, that they would always have their freedom, that they would always have the freedom to choose their destiny. So even though they had the lodges trying to subvert the White Scars, it failed because they had the word of their Primarch, their Gene Father, that, well, it wasn't necessary. There was nothing that they could be offered. They already had their freedom. So why fall to chaos? It's an interesting idea. And then after the few stupid idiots in the lodges tried to take over the Legion, Jagatai Khan just came around, beat the crap out of all of them, and then told the loyalists, it's like, hey, yeah, our brothers turned out to be idiots and fell to stupidity and chaos, and yeah, we're not going to do that, bros. So, we're just going to use our idiot brothers who are easily tricked to act like shock troopers, and we'll basically do the Mongol thing and push them in front of us, and they'll get killed because if they try to turn around, we'll just shoot them. So their only option is basically to attack the enemy and basically seek glorious death as retribution for their sins and their betrayal. That's worked out pretty well for White Scars. It turned out pretty well. Anyways, yeah, Warrior Lodges. Decent on paper. Sounds like a type of enlisted club or officer club or a mix of the two. But in practice, yeah, there's certain limits on what people should say and do or plan. When you're part of the military, I always say, you know, they say that the 1% have all the power in America. And that 1% are the rich. But there's also a group of individuals who also make up 1% of the United States. And that's the military. Now, what is more powerful? A dude with $1 billion in his bank account? Or a dude who has a gun? Yeah, probably the dude with the gun is a little bit more powerful. Especially when you're talking about an organization that has all the tanks and planes and aircraft carriers. So, yes, if you want to say that the rich control everything, which I don't agree with, if the military decided that, you know, screw those individuals, and the officers made certain orders, well, let's just say the military needs to crack down on that kind of dissent much more readily and have a lot more discipline than those individuals who control the money. Because if we don't have discipline within our ranks, let's just say that, yeah, we have the power, and we have to make sure that we use that power responsibly. With great power comes great responsibility. And the people with the true power is the military, not the rich, in any sense of the world. But that's just my personal view on it. Anyways, I'll leave it there, guys. That's how I relate 40K's warrior lodges to the real world. And, one other thing. I once asked the question, if there was a revolt amongst the recruits on Paris Island or in Camp Pendleton or any number of the training commands throughout the United States military, where would the revolt start? Well, it would start on the range, where all those recruits have all the ammo. I'll let you wonder on what would happen if all those recruits had followed their baser urges. Which is why going to the range and practicing our firearm training happens halfway through training, after discipline and order has been beaten into us. Just a thought. I told that to one of my fellow recruits when I was in boot camp, and he was like, oh. And yes, that is correct. There's a reason why they don't give us ammo until we know what discipline is. For that very reason. And we understand the responsibility of having the power of a firearm. Anyways, I'll leave it at that kind of dark note. Until next time, guys. Goodbye.